At the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns fell silent. And so at the 11th hour, or as near as it can be, on the Sunday closest to the 11th day of the 11th month, as is the case today, so do we. The Imperial War Museum has a collection of recordings of soldiers speaking about the First World War. What I find striking among those speaking about the armistice is how many speak of the silence. One soldier who was near Mons speaks of a silence that was tangible, a stark contrast with 4.5 years of artillery noise. Another speaks of the anticlimax, no sounds of celebration or joy, no singing or cheering, just exhausted, silent thanksgiving. Another soldier recalls his friends who were on the front line telling him that they felt flat, joyless, uncomprehending. The Imperial War Museum also has a recording of the moment the guns fell silent, captured photographically. There are two images, one from 10:58 hours and one from 1100 hours. On the first, the 5 lines are full of peaks, a bit like an ECG chart, with each peak in the line representing artillery fire. On the second, the 5 lines are completely flat. Silence, emptiness, flatness, anticlimax. I believe for many that is what that moment represented. Because after all, for the war to have ended there had to have been a war. So what is our silence for today? Our remembering is full of words and ritual, of music and symbolism, the power of poetry and liturgy. The poppies and the images of our remembrance help us to start to understand the weight and the cost of the wars we remember and the value of the sacrifices that have been made. But at the heart of our remembrance, there is an emptiness. 2 minutes for which there are no words to remember the horror of the violence that human beings can inflict on one another. No words to describe the trauma that stayed with those who came back for the rest of their lives. No words to explain why the war to end all wars did not end all wars. In our gospel reading today, we were told a story about young men leaving everything behind to follow Jesus. They were leaving their families, their work, their security, not knowing where they were going or what they would be doing. Today we remember those millions of men and women who left everything behind to follow orders in wars and conflicts, past and present, and those civilians whose lives have been lost or broken by war. I believe that however it is done, to follow someone is usually sacrificial. It involves surrender of some sort, surrender of self, surrender of will. To be a soldier, one needs to submit to authority, to accept discipline, and to put yourself at the service of others. I believe that to be a disciple is perhaps not all that different. As Christians, we are called to be a loving, remembering community. We gather here week by week, and once a month we gather as a Eucharistic community. We gather to remember the sacrifice made by the one that we follow. A few weeks ago, Kate, Rosemary and I were here at Trinity for a training session led by the Reverend Dr. Julian Templeton, our Synod's Training and Development Officer. We were having a refresher course for those lay members who are authorised to preside at communion. Whilst I was thinking about this service for this Sunday, I read the notes the course that Julian had given us at the course. It occurred to me we always have a moment of silence at the end of the prayer of consecration. As the bread and wine are lifted up, the body of Christ is broken for us, and the blood of Christ is shed for us. A moment of silence beyond words, between remembering his death and receiving his life. Remembering the one who, as it says in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 26, has appeared once for all at the end of the age to remove sin by the sacrifice of himself. Our silence of remembrance at the 11th hour began with the last post, used at military funerals to honour the dead. It ended with reveille, sounded to get soldiers up in the morning. I believe that we could interpret the silence in between as a kind of Holy Saturday between death and resurrection, a place of grief, abandonment and horror at human violence, but also a place of love, loss and bewilderment, a place beyond words, a place that begins in death and ends in hope. Hope that death had a meaning and that the sacrifice was worth something, that we will allow ourselves to be changed by someone else's gift. In our silence today, there was space for whatever we wish to bring: pride, grief, shame, discontentedness, horror, ambivalence. A hope that the sacrifices made by so many have made a difference, or perhaps a fear that they have not. But as a Christian community, in that silence for which we have no words, we are brought back to the silence of the sealed tomb on Holy Saturday, to the silence as the spilt blood is lifted up in the cup of life in which we all share. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns fell silent. Amen.